Okay, so today is Gimel Tevis. It's also the yahrzeit of Harav Hagoyin of Chaim Shmulevitz Zatzal. He was known to be a very, very heartzik Yid. He ended up being the Shiva of the Mir in Eretz Yisrael, and he's actually the father-in-law of Reb Nachman Partzovitz, and Reb Nachman Partzovitz is the father-in-law of Reb Chaim Mendel Bratsky. So it's Reb Chaim Mendel's grandfather is Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. So he has a famous story with him where it says that the Navi says to Rachel, Mama Rachel, stop crying. So when he went there, he said, Mama, the Navi sagt, ihr sollt nicht weinen. Aber Chaim sagt, wein, Mama, wein, wein, Mama, wein. Don't stop crying until Klal Yisrael comes out of Golus. That's one of the famous shtickler from Chaim Shmulevitz. That you could read in the book. I'm going to tell you a story about Reb Chaim Shmulevitz that you cannot read in the book. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was a nasher. You know, at the Kavod, he also liked to nash. He appreciated a good shtickle mazonius, a good shtickle liker. So his wife used to hide the cake from him because his wife wanted to keep him healthy and slim. So he had some children, and when I was in the Mir, there was a Rafal Shmulevitz who was a son of his, and there was another there was a Rafal Shmulevitz who became more of a Shiva. He had a brother who was a very geniusy guy, but he wasn't Rosh Shiva material. He was a little verflogen, but very chashuv yid. And as part of his, the uncles all got paid from the yeshiva. So as part of his job that he had to do to earn his paycheck, is he had to be the shoyl u'meish of second seder. So what he would do is, could be his name was Mayor. I don't remember what his name was. So at the beginning of second seder, he used to walk through the entire Bishmerish, hoping that no one would stop him. And I always stood in his path to make sure to stop him, to schmooze and learn with him. So the story goes where Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was once in the middle of saying shir. Now we know Reb Chaim Shmulevitz had an apartment that was in the building itself. Reb Nachum lived in the building. They lived in the actual near building. That was his apartment. So it was the middle of a shir. Reb Chaim saying shir to Talmidim, and his little son Meirel, I think his name is Meir, barges into the Bismerish in the middle of the shir. He said, Abba, matzati uga. Chati li v'chati lecha v'al tagid le'ima. So that was the story with Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. Schusoi Yogan Aleinu. Okay, David. Yesterday, I wasn't able to hear anybody. I see everybody's on mute. Did I make everybody mute, or that's because I don't want to be on mute?
No, no one has anything intelligent to say yet.
Oh, okay. I'm the only one who says it anyway.
We're here listening. Yeah. We're basically listening.
Okay, gewaltig. So yesterday we started off with a brisa that said Taner shesikoi beklipe arla. The sugya started because the Mishnah says that you're not allowed to use isurei anah, such as chometz. When you burn it, you're not allowed to benefit from the heat. So the Gemara brought a brisa that said that if you lit up a tanner, you heated up a tanner with klipei arla, if it's a brand new oven, meaning the walls were forged with the heat that came from Yisur Anah, you have to destroy the oven. The Gemara brought another brisa that says ben chadosh ben yashan yutzon. You don't have to destroy the oven. So the Gemara wanted to suggest that haRebbi v'haRabbanon, there's a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbanon if you say they're shvach eitzim b'pas. Do you say that the bread that you baked with heat that was generated by fuel that was Isur Anah, does that go into the pas, so to speak? And therefore the pas that you baked is Asur B'Anah, you can't eat it. Or do you say, yes, by breaking the bread I took advantage of Isur Anah and I violated Isur Anah, but that doesn't make the pas Asur B'Anah. So Rebbe held that the pas does become Asur if I baked bread in an oven with fuel that was Asur, and the Rabbanan held that if I baked bread in an oven and the fuel is Asur, it doesn't make the bread Asur. So the Gemara wanted to extend that svara to explain the machlokes in the two brises, whether or not the new oven has to be destroyed or not. Rebbe who holds that the shvach of eitzim goes in to the bread, it would go into the oven as well, and you have to destroy the oven. While the Rabbanan who hold that if the bread is a mutter that you baked with it, an oven that you forged with the heat of that flame would also be mutter. But Frek the Gemara, just because Rebbe holds shvach eitzim bepas, that's not a reason why he should hold that the oven becomes usher. Because let's think about it. The oven, let's say, has the shvach eitzim in it. But when you're baking, then what's the other one has from an oven? That they bake things with it. So when you bake the next cake or bread in that oven, it's not just the oven heat that's going into the bread. You're actually putting in a new batch of fuel as well. The new batch of fuel is not going to be Isser Hana. So therefore, the next bread that you're going to bake in this oven is going to have two components to it. It'll be Zev v'Zeh Goyim. Who said that Rebbe holds in the case of Zev v'Zeh Goyim, where the next piece of bread, the next loaf of bread that I'm going to bake in this oven is not going to get its baking exclusively from Yisur Hana, from the oven. Rather, it's getting it from the oven and the new fuel, which is Mutter Bana. How do you know there that Rebbe would hold that it will be Asr? So the Gemara says we're forced to find a Tana who holds that Zev v'Zeh Goyim is also Asr, and Rebbe we don't necessarily see from Rebbe's halachas that he agrees to that. So the Gemara says, Ha Rabbi Eliezer, Ha Rabbanim. We're going to find a Rabbi Eliezer who says that Zev v'Zeh Goyim is Asr. In fact, my high Rabbi Eliezer. So which Rabbi Eliezer, which halacha did Rabbi Eliezer say that you could extract from that you see that he holds Zev v'Zeh Goyim is Asr? Ilema Rabbi Eliezer the Sar. If you're going to suggest that is the Rabbi Eliezer who talks about the Sar. Sar is sourdough, is yeast. Ditnan. Sa'or shel chulin v'shel truma shenafel l'soichisa. There was some yeast that was partially of chulin, partially of truma. It fell into a dough. Ve'ein bozek kedei lahachmitz. Ve'ein bozek kedei lahachmitz. Let's say the recipe requires 3 ounces of yeast, and you have 1.5 ounces of truma and 1.5 ounces of chulin. When it's darfu v'chamtu, between the 2 yeasts, the whole bread, the whole dough became chametz. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the last one that I added is the one that counts. Let's not think into what that means yet, because the Gemara is going to clarify it shortly. I don't care if the truma was put in there first or if the truma was put in there last. It will never be able to do iser. The truma yeast will never be able to make the entire dough have a status of truma and have a status of iser ad sheyehei boy kedei lahachmitz. And Rashi says, Rashi just says, unless the truma itself would be able to be machmitz the dough. If it's only coming together with something else, it would not be able to aser the whole new dough. And Tosfos takes it a step further, I believe. And Tosfos says that it has to be that only the truma would be able to be machmitz and not the chul. Now let's go back and drill down in Rabbi Eliezer's shot. Rabbi Eliezer said you go back to the last one. When did Rabbi Eliezer say that you follow the last one? So let's say truma fell in, then chulin fell in, and you quickly pull the truma out. That's when you say you go back to the last, and therefore the dough will be mutter. If you left both the chulin and the truma yeast in the new dough, aser, then for sure the dough is aser. So you clearly see from here, alma zev v'zeh goyim aser. You see the fact that there was two parts. The yeast comprised of half truma, half chulin. It still is going to aser the dough, even though the dough that rose didn't rise exclusively because of the truma. It rose because of the combination of the chulin and the truma yeast that was in there. So you see clearly zev v'zeh goyim is aser. So the Gemara wants to say that if zev v'zeh goyim is aser by this dough, who adin, if I have a new oven that was forged with Yisurei Hana, even though when I bake in it a second time, I'm going to have wood or fuel that's not asher bana. So the bread that I'm going to bake in this oven will be a product of zev zegarim, the oven infusing it with iser, and the new fuel infusing it with heter. It's still going to be asher, just like this new dough that was partially infused with heter of yeast that was chulin, and partially infused with iser that was yeast that was truma. Correct the Gemara. Umimai, the time of Rabbi Eliezer, Kabaye, who said that Abaya has the exclusivity on explaining what Rabbi Eliezer meant in the Brisa. Maybe I can argue with Abaye's perspective, with Abaye's explanation of Rabbi Eliezer's halacha. And Dilma time of Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum Achrin Aniba, Loishna Kodam Vesilak Iser, Loishna Loikodam Vesilak Iser. Who said that when Rabbi Eliezer said you go basar achrein, it means when you took out the iser first? That was Abaye's comment that he added into Rabbi Eliezer. But maybe Rabbi Eliezer holds that no. At the end of the day, what causes the iser? The thing it's called first past the post, the thing that crosses the finish line. So if I need 3 ounces of yeast and I put in 1.5 ounces of truma yeast, that wouldn't have had its effect. The last 1.5 ounces of chulun yeast that you added is what pushed it over the line and what made the dough chametz. And therefore, you go to the last one, even though they're both there. So maybe Rabbi Eliezer, in fact, holds that zev zegarim is mutter. If they're both there together, maybe it would be mutter. It's only Abaye who says that Rabbi Eliezer means only when you took out the iser. But who said? If you look at Rabbi Eliezer on his own, maybe Rabbi Eliezer holds that zev zegarim is mutter. So we don't have a makoriat to Rabbi Eliezer saying zev zegarim is aser. So tomorrow, Ella Rabbi Eliezer the Atzei Ashera. Let's try Rabbi Eliezer who expressed a halacha lagabi an Asherah tree. Now we know an Asherah tree is Isra Hana. It's avodah zarah. The time we learned, not al himena eitzim. What if you took wood from an Asherah tree? Asurim bana. That wood surely is aser bana. Hizuk bahen es hatanor. What if you heated up an oven with wood that was Isur na from an Asherah tree? Chadash yutatz. If it was a brand new oven, you have to destroy it. Yoshan, if it's an old oven, yutzan, you're not allowed to use that heat, so you're not allowed to bake in it until it cools off, and you provide a new fuel that was muter bana. Avabayasapas, if you baked bread in it, asurin bahana, it's going to be asur bahana. So if you bake bread in an oven and you used wood of the Asherah as fuel, the bread will be asur bahana. This arba bacheres. So even if it keeps on mixing up, kul and asurin bahana, because of course, avodah zarah is not bottle. Rabbi Eliezer Eimer yoylech hana liyam hamelach. You take, even though you've mixed in so many different things into this, you don't know what part of this is isur hana. So if you take the value of whatever the isur hana was and you destroy it, then you'd be allowed to have hana from the rest of the breads. And they told him, Amuloi, you can't, Yolech Hanoi Liyamech will not work to get rid of the avodah zarah because ain't pidyin l'avodah zarah. You cannot redeem avodah zarah, and therefore it will remain asur. I'll call upon him. What do you see from here? You see from here, it says exactly the same case that we're discussing. It says Taner Chadash Yutatz. So Taner Chadash Yutatz is exactly the same case as we're discussing. The only difference between this case and our case is our case was talking about Arla, which was Yisur Hana, and this is speaking about Asher, which is Yisur Hana. But either way, you see that an oven that was forged with Isser, you cannot use it again, even though the second time you use it, you're going to have wood that's muter ba'ana, and it's zev zegarim. You see here that Rabbi Eliezer holds it's still asur. The Rabbanon actually here also hold that it's asur. They just hold that you don't have the eitzah of yoylech hana yam hamelach. So the Rishonim speak out that, of course, we mean the Rabbanon also, which just means Rabbi Eliezer v'Yosy. The Rabbanon in this brayso are not identified. So the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer holds zev zegarim is asur, but of course even the Rabbanon would hold zev zegarim is asur. So Zok the Gemara, you still don't have a raya from this case of avodah zarah to our case of standard Yisur Hana. Aimer the Shamas Lali Rabbi Eliezer Bavayda Zara, the Chomer Isura. Where did Rabbi Eliezer say Zev Zagorim? That's only when you're talking about an Asherah, which is Avodah Zarah, which is a very serious Isser. There, even the Zev Zagorim will cause Isser. But Bishari Surim Shabbatara Mishamisle, who said he would agree to this by other Isurim? So we're back. We're right back where we started from. We no longer have a raya because maybe it only applies to Avodah Zarah, and by Avodah Zarah it's a svara to say that you should say Zev Zagorim is also because there's no bittul by Avodah Zarah. Mashenk in other Isurim there's bittul, so maybe Zev Zagorim should also be mutter. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you what my raya is. This is my favorite raya. Zok to Gemara, Elam Kain Aman Tarmiyah. We don't really have a choice. We have a brisa that says by Klayim Menorla that the Tanner has to be Yutatz, which means Zev Zagorim is Aser. If it's not this Rebbe Eliezer, then who is it? There is no one else. So Rebbe Eliezer says by Avodah Zarah clearly you say Zev Zagorim is Aser. We'll have to say, because we don't have a choice, because we don't have any other Tana who says that, we'll have to say that the Rebbe Eliezer who said this halacha by Avodah Zarah by Shera must also say it by Stam Isurei Hana. And besides that, I have another raya that Rebbe Eliezer applies this chumrah of Zev Zagorim even to standard Isurei Hana. Because a Tanya Behedya, V'chein Hayer Rebbe Eliezer Ozer V'chol Isurin Shabbatayah. So we actually have a first Rebbe Eliezer. So I would ask, once you have a Rebbe Eliezer who says beferish, this applies to Chol Isurin Shabbatayah, so why do you need the first teretz of we don't have a choice? We haven't found anybody. We actually have found somebody. Rebbe Eliezer says beferish, it applies to Chol Isurin Shabbatayah. Amar Abaye, Zok Abaye. In Tim Saloimer, Zev Zagorim Aser. If you're going to hold, and you learn Pshat in our Mishnah, in our Brisa, by Klayim, that says Atala Yutatz, it's working with the halacha of Zev Zagorim Aser, Rebbe Hainu Rebbe Eliezer. You could say that Rebbe agrees to Rebbe Eliezer, and Rebbe could be the Tana of the Brisa. When the Gemara originally said Ha Rebbe V'Arabonon, Rebbe might actually be the Tana of the Brisa who said the Bechodesh Yutat. So we can just quickly look back to the Brisa that was quoted, the first Brisa, and it says in the first Brisa, Tana Shasiko Bechliba Arla Bekashin Shalklai Kerem Chodesh Yutzan Yoshon Yutzan of a Bayapas Rebbe Eimer Apas Tasura. So you can say up until this point, this is all Rebbe talking if he would agree with Rebbe Eliezer. However, Zaktimar. Vayimtim Taloimer, Zev is a Garim mutter, but if you're going to say that Rebbe holds Zev is a Garim is mutter, Fahacha Mishum the Yesh Shvachetzim Bepasu, and the reason why Rebbe answers the pass there is because of Yesh Shvach Eitzim Bepas, and the Rebbe would disagree by the oven, and Rebbe would hold by the oven since it's Zev is a Garim, it's going to be Aser. Then Hani Kairos, the Koisos, and Sluchios Asiri. What if it wasn't an oven that became forged with Isurei Hana, but you had cups and plates, things that you don't bake in, things that are mere containers that became forged in an oven? When you put anything into these kelim, if you use them, there's no Zev Zagorim anymore because you're not adding heat. You don't add heat to a cup in order to be able to have it contain liquid. That's it. The cup is forged. So therefore, Hanikaris, because it's Lichars Asiri, they would be Aser. Why would they be Aser? Because they're not Zev Zagorim. There is no fuel added to those. They're used as is. Keep Ligi, Hamachloikus of Zev Zagorim is only relevant B'Taner Ukdeira. Because those, Taner is an oven. The oven, the next time you use it, you're going to be adding fuel that's mutabana, and therefore there'll be a shaila of Zev Zagorim. Or Kedera, a pot that you're going to put on the flame, again, the pot's going to be working together with heat from a flame, so even though the pot was forged with Isser Hana, when it's cooking now, something that you're going to cook in it, it has also the impact of the new wood, the new fuel that you're using with it, that will be heter, so it's still Zev Zagorim. Lamandam is Zev Zagorim. Also, Lamandam is Zev Zagorim also. Also, Lamandam is Zev Zagorim muter, sorry. But Ikad Amri, there was another lashon that said Afilu l'man omer zev v'zeh goyim mutter. Even if you can hold zev v'zeh goyim is mutter kedei asura. The hakablu v'shulak mekamed enitim eitzim de'teira. A pot would not be comparable to an oven. Rather, it would be comparable to ka'irish, kosher, and sluchias. Because sure, a pot is designed to cook with, but you put the food in the pot before you heat it up, before you put the pot on the stove. So at that point, when the pot is containing the liquids or the food that you're putting into it, even before it's heated up, there the pot is being used by itself. It's not a zev zegarim. There's only the only food in the pot, and therefore it would be awesome. However, an oven, you don't put the bread into the oven until the oven is heated up. You don't put the bread into the oven cold, and then you put the coals and start heating up the oven. By the time you put the bread in the oven, it's already heated up. So the moment that your bread goes into the oven, it's going to be impacted by a zev v'zeh goyim because there's fuel of heter inside the oven of Isser. Amar Yosy, Amar B'Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Taner sheyasiku b'klipe arla or b'kashim shel klai hakerem. So again, let's focus over here. We just learned that Rebbe is the one who holds that yesh shvach eitzav pas, and if I bake bread with isurei ano, a fuel, that bread is also to eat. So look what the B'Yehuda Shmuel said. Taner sheyasiku b'klipe arla, or b'kashim shel klai hakerem, chodosh yutatz, yoshan yutzan, afa boyes pas. Rebbe Omer apas muteres, v'chachamim Omer apas asura. So Shmuel twisted around the quote of Rebbe, because we learned that Rebbe is machmer, that Rebbe is mekel. Frekti Gemara, v'atanya ibcha. Our brayso that we quoted has Rebbe being the machmer and the chum being the mekel. Dr. Gemara, Shmuel ibchatani. Maybe Shmuel didn't have our girsa, and maybe Shmuel's girsa was in the fact that Rebbe's mekel and the chum are machmer. But Viboy Sema, and this is a bombshell. Really, even Shmuel knew that Rebbe was the machmer and Shmuel was the mekel, and Shmuel knew that in this case we passing like Rebbe lechumra. But Shmuel was afraid that the oilam, the people, would not accept that chumra from Rebbe, and they would say, no, why should we be machmer like Rebbe? Let's be mekel like the Roiv. Let's be mekel like the Rabbanon. So Shmuel needed to find a tactic to fool people into accepting the psak l'chumra. So Zok Gemara, Kasav Shmuel halacha k'Rebbe mechaveroi v'loy mechaverov. Normally, we don't pass like Rebbe when there's a roiv against him, such as in this case, it's the Rabbanon, it's the plural that argue with him. But uvaha, Shmuel happened to have held that in this case, with the bread that you baked with fuel, those Isra Anoah, afilu mechaverov. He held in this case we need to pass like Rebbe l'chumra. But if they would have just passed like Rebbe l'chumra, people might not have accepted it. So he said, "V'savar asanya ibcha." I'll quote it backwards, so that I'll say over the Isser in the name of the Rabbanon, in the name of the Rabbim, ki heicha the nekom Rabbanon l'Yisura, so that the people, so that the Rabbanon are saying Isser, which is the Roiv, and therefore people will accept this chumra. So this has got to raise an eyebrow. Basically, what it's saying is anytime you want someone to believe you, you can say, "Oh, Rav Shlomo said." We know people who are guilty of that crime, and we lose respect for them. So this is brought down in the early Achronim. The Eliyahu Rabbah brings down that stamazoi, if you say something over in someone's name and they didn't say it, it's a very big avla. But if it's because you need to create a gather, it's because you want to protect the integrity of halacha, and you need to convince people of something that's right, you're actually allowed to do that.
Yosy, then that argument's going to go to anybody. Everybody's going to say that.
Yeah. How do you maintain integrity by lying?
Right. I've heard people, the same people in the same breath saying Rosh Hashanah this and Rosh Hashanah that when it comes to like not doing business honestly. And then I asked a different Rosh Hashanah doesn't know what he's talking about.
Who's this?
I once heard someone say. I once heard somebody say he's talking about Rosh Hashanah, and then I questioned him about the way he a certain business practice he was doing that I didn't think was honest, and the person said to me, when it comes to these things, Rosh Hashanah doesn't really know what he's talking about. So I understand you're a guy who goes from close to Rosh Hashanah all your whole life, but everything Rosh Hashanah, it's not. So where it's a buffet, where it's convenient for you, it's Rosh Hashanah. Otherwise, it's somebody else.
I hear you.
That's life.
But in this case, Shmuel did get caught.
Yeah, right.
Even in this case, Shmuel got caught. But as I stated, that the Rabbanim sometimes have to package their presentations in such
Yeah,
a way
works the same way.
that
Works the
people
same
will
way.
accept it.
Works the same way for shul quarantine. Apparently, it works the same way for shul quarantine rules too. Okay, you see.
Well, a minute, isn't this an Iker
Editorial
Diamri?
discretion.
This is an Iker Diamri. It's only an opinion, isn't it? It's not what actually necessarily happens. Is it?
I'm not talking about Shmuel was trying to get people to be machmer and not to use bread that was baked with fuel that was Isser Bana.
Oh, you saying it's an alternative answer. It's an Eboy Sema. It's really one and the same. One just says that he switched it around stam, like we hear all over shops. We have that, and one gives a reason why he switched it around.
I hear.
It's really the same answer.
Oh no,
guys, this is
one
not
is saying that he's lying. He switched there. One could be an accident. He made a mistake, and the other one he did it on purpose.
He did it on purpose because he wanted to paskin in his city. He wanted to paskin l'chumra, and he was afraid that if he did it, because the oil was so learned that they would know that it was a das yochid, that they would go against him. He's the rav. He has bright the places. Let him do what he wants to do.
No, you don't have to. You can say I paskin differently, but you don't have to change the mandi amrim, switch the mandi amrim around. That is a lot. That is indeed a loss of integrity. You question.
I raise an eyebrow just as Yosy said we should.
That's more than an eyebrow.
This is not the first time we had such a Gemara, but you see that's what's done. Yeah, in those days, I guess they couldn't just look it up on the internet. There's a much smaller chance of getting caught. You had to have someone who's a mumche in all the prices to be able to catch them on it.
Right.
Today it wouldn't work. So the Bishla al Gabi Gecholim, Divrei HaKoil HaPas Muteres. So the Brisa said earlier that if you weren't making it in the fire, it was just on coals, the heat of the coals, that's for sure. You don't say Yesh Shvach Eitzim B'Pas, because at that point, the original Isra of wood would have already been gone, and now it's just the heat of the coals. Amar B'Dom Shmuel. I'm sorry, the Amar goes out. Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'Rabchia bar Asher bar Yochanan. Chad Amar, one of the two said, Lo Shanu El Gecholam Aimimois. If the coals are just glowing but they're not flaming, that's when we say everybody agrees the passes muteris. Abel Gecholam Lo Cheshois. If the coals are still flaming a bit, Asurin, it'll still be also. So loichashes means there's movement on it. Rashi touches oimois as arazam lo yamamu. The big cedar trees couldn't move it. And loichashes are gecholim boyarish. Nearest kimisnanois for loichashes luzu. You see, they're flaming up a little bit. They look like they're moving around a little bit and lighting each other up. Okay, so what does it say over here? Because there's still too much mamoshes there that Isser is going in to the bread. According to Rebbe, who holds Yeshvach Eitzim B'Pas. And the other Mandamar said in Rebbe, even if the coals are somewhat flamed, but there's not a big flame happening, it's still not going to be a problem, and the bread baked on that flame would be mutter, even according to Rebbe. I understand the Mandamar holds that if these coals are still active, it'll be usher because there's still fire here, and that shvach goes into the bread. If you hold that even if the coals are somewhat flaming, it's still mutter, and we don't say that that's called shvach etzim pas. So then, pas to usher. I'm sorry. Pas to usher. The yeshvach eitzim bepas l'Rebbe hechem ishkachasle. So, under what conditions, if even if the coals are somewhat flaming, you're saying there the isser of Rebbe does not apply. So, how much fire? What do you need to have in order to trigger Rebbe's isser of yeshvach eitzim bepas? That's if there's such a big flame going that the fire is actually right on the bread. That's only then does Rebbe hold that you say yeshvach eitzim bepas. Like Rashi's keneged a pas maver eitzim b'fiataner. So the flame is right underneath. I guess the flame is like right on the bread. So there you say that the shvach eitzim is in the pas. The oxidation of the flame is going right into the pas. But if it's just a glowing, or even some active coal, there still wouldn't be a problem of shvach eitzim pas. Mechlal, based on what you're saying, there are abundant the pligiala shari afilu b'shavuka kenegdai. So there are abundant are saying even when there's actual fire right on the bread, there are abundant hold you don't say yesh shvach eitzim pas. How do we understand that? Eitzim the surah l'rabbanon heichem mishkachas lehu. So how would it ever be relevant if you can always use any type of wood as fuel, even if you're right under the flame? So what is the impact of any wood that's also bano? What can't I do with this wood? I can clearly even bake on it. So where would Isser Ano on wood ever impact me? Amar Babi Bachama, very simple, Bishar Shiva. If you wanted to use the wood as a footstool, if you wanted to make it into furniture. So according to the Rabbanan, anytime you want to use Isser Ano for fuel, you're not allowed to, it's also bano, but whatever you bake in that fuel will not become Osir. The only way to have Isur Ano that you can't use even the product of what you made out of the wood is if you made a piece of furniture. That would be Asr Ano. Boy minei, Rami Bar Chama, Reb Chisda. Tanish Yosy be Atze Hektish. What happens if it wasn't Isur Ano, it wasn't Avodah Hektish? What is Allah? V'afabai, and you baked it. V'afabai apas, l'rabbanon deshari b'kamai samai. The Rabbanon who holds ein shvach eitzim apas. What would he hold if the pas that I used was if the wood that I used? I'm sorry, if the wood that I used was hektish. My Omer lei hapas asur. The pas would be asur. Frek the Gemara uma bein zu la'arla. What's the difference between this and arla? Amar Rava, what do you mean? Hachi ashta. Arla batela b'masayim. Arla is batal b'masayim. So therefore, Rashi says hilchach lechamira mishakala v'nivar isurai. Once it's all burnt up, we won't say that there's a problem with it. But hektish afilu be'elef lebatal. Hektish is not batal even in 1,000, and therefore, even though it's all consumed, we'll still say there's an isser, and we'll say yeshvach eitzim b'pas. So there's a lot of problems, there's a lot of kashas on this component of the Gemara. Right off the bat, Tosfos asks, it says hektish afilu be'elef lebatal. In fact, Tosfos tema ma chomer hizu. Why is that a chomer? Hektish is a more cruel thing. Halay hektish dovei sheish lematirnu aydei chilul. You can actually be pointed to hektish. Umatam zeh and dinei liyash batal afilu beiser kal afilu midrabanan. So forget about the fact that hektish be'elef lebatal. Hektish will never have bittul because it's a dovei sheish lematirnu. So what Tosfos is saying is, why is the Gemara saying that the reason why hektish is more chomer is because I feel be'elef lebatal? Hektish is a davar sheyesh lematirin, and even if it wasn't a davar chomer, anytime you have a davar sheyesh lematirin, it's never going to be batal. But the Mashal asks another kasha. We're going to soon see that the ash of hektish, unlike the ash of other things, once it's ash, it's not isser anymore, but the ash of hektish remains usher forever. So therefore, I understand why you say ein shvach eitzim b'pas when it comes to Klayim and Orla, because Klayim and Orla, once they're burnt, once they're consumed, there's no more Isser anymore. But by Hektish, we learned that the Isser stays forever. And if the Isser stays forever, then what's the comparison between Orla? What's the Gemara's kasha? Ma benjul Orla, by Kachim, the Isser never goes away. That's the kasha of the mashal. It's a bomb kasha that the mashal asks. I don't remember the teretz offhand. I don't have it clear enough to share it, but it's a bomb kasha. Ma ben zula orla. How could you compare? How could you even have a havamina to compare hektish to orla? Orla, once it's burned, the ash is mutter. By the hektish, it stays usher. So of course the isser is still there even after it's completely consumed. Anyway, the Gemara answers that Arla is betel b'masayim, hektish afilu be'elef lebatal. Allah Amar Rava, ikashalei, if you have a kasha, ha kasha. This should be the kasha. V'halimol hamasik. Once you use eitzim of hektish, if you use eitzim of hektish, so you're moil, you're having enough of them. And we know the halacha is Whenever you're moil b'hektish, if hektish has a piece of wood, hektish has anything that you take and you have enough from, it automatically goes l'chulin, and now you owe hektish the debt of keren v'chaimish, which is what you have to pay when you're moil b'hektish. So over here, the moment you lit up the wood, automatically the wood would have become chulin, so the pas should not be usher. So how could you suggest that the pas that you burn in the wood of hektish, that you bake in the heat from the wood of hektish, is usher bano? To the contrary, it's chulin. When we're talking about hektish, we're not talking about bedek habayis. Hektish of bedek habayis, hektish that has a monetary value, that has the din that if you're moil in it, it goes l'chulin. But when you're talking about karbonis, that's different. Now, what does Atei Shlom mean? Rashi tells us that it means is, I took a piece of wood and I said, this wood I'm giving as a carbon, as a shlomim, meaning I'm going to sell this wood, buy an animal with it, and that animal is going to be brought as a carbon shlomim. So this is not standard bedek habayis anymore. This already has a din of a kedushas carbon, and there you don't say that if you're moil in it, it goes l'chulin. So we're talking about Atei Shlom Maskinan. So we're talking about wood that's like kedushas agov. V'aldiv Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar hektish b'shoyig mischalo, b'mezid ein mischalo. Rabbi Yehuda says that even when you're talking about regular bedek habayis, if you're moil b'shoyig, only then does it become chulin. But if you're moil b'mezid, then it does not become chulin. My time aloi, b'mezid my time aloi, keeping the la bar me'ilahu loy nafik l'chulin. But the psukim of me'ilah only apply to shoygig. Since they only apply to shoygig, the rules of yitzia l'chulin does not apply by mezid. So therefore, shlomim nami, even if it's a shoygig, even the la bar me'ilah nenu loy nafik l'chulin. So Rashi tells us, I don't understand. Why did we have to pick a case that's an unusual type of hektish, and it's not yet l'chulin even b'shoygig? Why didn't the Gemara just answer that hacha b'mayaskinon b'mezid? And by mezid we learn that anything you moil on b'mezid does not go l'chulin. So I believe Tosfos answers. Tosfos asks the question: have a much look me ba'atzei hektish u'b'mezid v'alibid Rabbi Yehuda el delav orcha demilsa lav b'mezid. Normally people aren't over on me'ilah b'mezid. People are not going to take advantage of hektish. So the normal case of me'ilah is when it was done by mistake, and therefore we want to pick a normal case of me'ilah where it was done by mistake, and therefore the Gemara stelled it on by Atei Shlomim, because by Atei Shlomim, even if it was done by mistake, it would not go l'chulin. Zok the Gemara, this whole assumption that you made that led us to explain the shaila of hektish by Atei Shlomim is based on the fact that anytime there's me'ilah, the subject of the me'ilah goes l'chulin. Is that true? But Tanya, we learned, kol nesrafin often mutter, anything that has to get burnt, anything that you have a chiv to burn it. The halacha is often mutter. Once you burn it, it's ashes mutter. Like we learned in our Mishnah, you have to burn chametz. The ash of the chametz becomes mutter. Chutz me'atzei ashera. There's two exceptions to this rule that even after you burn it and it's already ashes, there's still a nisrano. One of them is atzei ashera, and the second one is ve'efer hektish. So you see that the efer hektish stays also forever. So you see that it doesn't go l'chulin. You want the whole kasha was that whenever you make me'ilah, you go l'chulin. But over here, if you burn the wood of hektish, we say it doesn't go l'chulin. Zok Gemara la'olam v'efer hektish la'olam aser. Amar Rabbi Chama kegoyin shenafla d'leika me'aleh. Our case is when do you say that me'ilah makes it go l'chulin? That's if someone is over me'ilah, he becomes mechuyev to pay back hektish the value of the anah that he had, and the thing that he had anah from goes l'chulin. Where the Gemara says, or where the Brayso says, efer hektish l'olam aser, is speaking where there was no human involvement. Human involvement makes the hektish go l'chulin. But what if wood of hektish was in a fire? Nobody lit the fire. Nobody used it. It happened by itself. There, avada efer hektish l'olam aser, because there's no me'ilah there. So when the Brayso says the efer hektish l'olam aser, is referring to when it got ignited by itself, but no one did it. The lek inish to nimah, so there's no person there to make the me'ilah, and therefore there's no person to affect the Yitzia L'chulin of this piece of hektish. Shmai Amar v'oishen shetunin geniza. There are specific type of hektish. When it says v'efer hektish lo'ilum aser, it doesn't mean any type of hektish. It's only referring to specific type of hektish where the Torah specifically tells us that even after it's burnt, it still remains aser bano. The Tanya, the samu benachas. So we're referring to, of course, what we started the sugi with, Trumas Adeshin. It says v'samu benachas, v'samu kula, v'samu shelo yifazer. It says v'samu eitel hamizbeach by Trumas Adeshin, and the ash that we're talking about when the Brash says v'efer hektish lo'ilum aser is speaking about the ash of Trumas Adeshin, where there's a special pasuk that tells us that it remains aser bana, it remains kodesh even after it's burnt. But every other type of hektish, once it gets burnt, the ash will be mutter. Okay, you see from here, the Samsari speaks out, it says v'samu benachas. When you're putting down the ashes, Eitzel Mizbeach, the word sima, as opposed to the word nesina, means putting it down gently. So if it would say v'nasata es ha'efer Eitzel Mizbeach, it would mean you could just dump it. If it says sima, it means you have to put it gently. So the Samsari speaks out, the bracha, that the Kohanim give Klal Yisrael, one of them is v'yasem l'cha shalom. It doesn't say v'yinasem l'cha shalom. It's v'yasem l'cha shalom. Even the shalom that we'll have will come out in a very nice way. It will never be in a rough fashion. Zok the Gemara Vayter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein bir chametz ela b'shreifa. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the only way to be mekayim the mitzvah of bir chametz is by burning it. You can't just be mefazer l'ruach or do anything else to it or bury it. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda ein bir chametz ela b'shreifa. The halach is bir chametz has to be done with shreifa. But I didn't know it's logic. I don't need any psukim for it. Logic dictates that the proper way to dispose of chametz is by burning it. Uman noisar she'enei bebal yirah bal yimatzei. Noisar, which is not subject to the isra of bal yirah and bal yimatzei. In other words, after it becomes noisar, there's no isra to keep it around. It's usher taka, but there's no isra to keep it around. Nevertheless, ton shreifa, we want it burnt. Chametz, which every moment that it's there, I'm over an iser, loy kol shekain, shatan sreifa, surely I should need sreifa. Amrullah, they told him, you have to be very careful when you make your kal v'chomers, because you're trying to bring a kal v'chomer that shows that since chametz is so chomer, we have to burn it. I'm going to show you that burning it will actually lead to a kula, which has the opposite effect of what you're trying to do. Kol din shatadon. At first glance, it seems like it's a chumrah, you're mandating shreifa, but you're going to see that it can come to a kula. It's not a good kal v'chomer. And let me show you why. What if you're telling me that the only way you could be yoy to the mitzvah of destroying chametz is by burning it? What if you didn't have wood? What if you didn't have the ability to burn it? So you shouldn't do anything? Because according to you, there's no mitzvah to do with anything else. So you're suggesting that if I can't do shreifa, then I don't do anything. So your kal v'chomer is not good because your kal v'chomer will lead to a kula. You're going to leave the chametz in existence if you don't have access to firewood. So So we tried another approach, not a kal v'chomer, but rather a memetzini. Noiser aser b'achila, v'chametz aser b'achila. Ma noiser b'shreifa, av chametz b'shreifa. So that was a second approach. They told him that's not either a good approach. Nevela techiach she'asura be'achila ve'init tunus reifa. Nevela is asur b'achila, but there's no chiyuv to burn in nevela. Amerlen havish noiser asur b'achila uvahana. So let's talk about noiser. Let's talk about noiser again. Noiser asur b'achila and it's asur b'ana. V'chametz also b'achila uvana ma noiser ton shreifa, just like noiser requires shreifa, avchametz ton shreifa, because by noiser. One second, let me just go back a second. Havish noiser also b'achila uvana. Havish of noiser, which means the chelav, the parts that are brought on the mizbeach, those are going to be also b'ana. And chametz is also b'achila b'ana. I can bring a right from Shor Niskal that even that should not require shreifa. It still doesn't have to be burnt. So he told him back, Havish noiser also bachilu vano the onish kares. The chalavim of noiser is also bachilu vano, and it has an isher kares to eat it, which Shar Niskal does not have. The chametz also bachilu vano vanish kares. Man noiser b'sreifa av chametz b'sreifa. Amrulai, they told him, no, chelboy shall Shar Niskal yechiach. The chelev of a Shar Niskal will prove to you that you don't need treifa. So also bachila uvano vanish kares. It has all those things that noiser has. They ain't on treifa, and it still doesn't need to be burned. Chazar Rabbi Yehuda, v'danu denachet. So Rabbi Yehuda decided to come up with another kavachemer, and this is what he said: Noiser yesh na mival teshiru. There's an iser by noiser to leave over the meat from a carbon past the deadline. The chametz mival teshiru, and there's also an iser to leave chametz past the deadline. So that's the similarity. Ma noiser b'sreifa of chametz b'sreifa. Okay, and I guess we'll stop here because Ashram Toli already gets into a little bit more. Actually, if we have to, we'll try to make a. It's no, we have enough. We have 1 minute. Let's go to the two. I told him Ashram Toli the chadas haba ala sofek l'dvarecha yechichu. I could bring a raya from an Ashram Toli and a chadas that's bala sofek. So Rashi tells us that an Ashram Toli you bring when you're not sure. You had chaylev and shuman here in front of you. You're not sure if you ate the chaylev or if you ate the shuman. So what you have to do is, so if you shat, that's what Asham Tali. If you shat with Asham Tali, and the Asham Tali became posel or became noisar. So the halacha is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to burn that chametz. You have to burn that. According to Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to bury it. It's a posel, a carbon. And Asham Tali that became posel, you have to bury it. And according to the Rabbanon, you have to burn it. So, and the same thing is with a chatas ha'oif habal ha'sofek. If a woman is not sure if she had a vlad or not, so if she had a vlad, she has to bring a chatas oif. But she's not sure if what she had was a vlad. So this chatas oif is a suffix, and therefore you cannot be makbid on the mizbeach. So there's a machlokes what you do with it. According to the Rabbanan, you do shreifa, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you just throw it out. You throw it into the river that runs along the Azara. So they said as follows: these are two items that we hold are b'shreifa, but you hold are not b'shreifa. So lidvarecha yoichichu, according to you, we should be able to bring a raya that your kal v'chomer is wrong or that your limit is wrong. Shehein b'bal tesiru, they all have the iser of bal tesiru. She'anu I'm in b'shreifa. We paskin in both those cases. Anashim toli and echat tzayif need shreifa. So according to our perspective, your raya would be a good raya. But you yourself learned in those two cases, you paskin that they only need bekfura. So because of that, it slugged up Rabbi Yehuda's last raya. Shosek Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda, because of his own psak, vibalti paskin, that by chatas ha'oif abal ha'sobek, and the Nashim Tolia became possible, they don't need shreifa. Rather, they only need kfura. His own words undid his limud that he wanted to bring a raya from noiser to chametz that requires shreifa. So Amar Yosef Hanid Amri Inchi, this is what people say, Kaba de Chata Nagra Begavan Nisref Chaydala. The blacksmith who made the spoon, he's going to get burnt with the mustard that he eats with that spoon, because the mustard is very sharp and it's going to burn his mouth. So basically he's going to get burnt with his own work. Abai Amar, Sadna Basadni Yosef, if somebody made handcuffs, a blacksmith who made handcuffs, when he ends up getting charged of a crime, he's going to be locked up and restrained with his own handcuffs. Midvil Yodei Mishtalim. From his own work, from his own craftsmanship, he's going to be paid back. Rav Amar Gira Begiri Miktel. A person who makes arrows, a manufacturer of arrows, will be shot and killed with his own arrow. Midvil Yodei Mishtalim. He gets paid back from his own handwork. So who did over here? Rabbi Yehuda himself, who learned that the Chatas Oif Abal Asabak and Asham Tolui are not b'shreifa, rather they're b'kfura. That's what undid his own raya from Noisar that chametz should be b'shreifa. We have Asham Tolui, the Chatas Abal Asabak are mechiach, that even though they have an iser of Baltoiser, nevertheless they do not have to be burnt. Okay, I guess we can stop here.
Yes.
Yes.